The first time I saw the young woman at my husband's funeral, she was standing beside the casket, like she belonged there more than I did. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even pretending to. She just stood with her hand resting lightly on the polished wood, her chin lifted, her expression calm, almost relieved. And when our eyes met, she gave me a small, polite smile, like we were strangers passing in a grocery aisle. That was the moment something inside my chest cracked open. Not grief, not shock, something colder. Because deep down, before anyone said a word, I already knew. I just didn't know how bad the betrayal really was. My name is Lorraine Whitaker. I am 59 years old, and until that morning in late October, I believed I had spent 32 years in a loyal marriage. I worked as a night custodian at a public high school in Cedar Falls, Iowa. It wasn't glamorous work. I spent my evenings pushing carts of cleaning supplies down quiet hallways, wiping chalk dust from desks, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights. But it was honest, and I had always told myself that honesty mattered more than status. My husband, Gerald Whitaker, had owned a small construction company called Whitaker Residential Builders. He wasn't rich, but we were comfortable. We owned a modest 2-story house with a wide porch and a maple tree that turned fire red every fall. We had no children. That had been the quiet ache of my life. Gerald used to say it didn't matter. He'd squeeze my hand and tell me we were enough for each other. I believed him. Until the funeral. The church smelled like lilies and polished wood. Neighbors whispered condolences. Gerald's sister Donna clutched my arm dramatically, her perfume sharp enough to make my eyes water. "You were such a devoted wife," she kept repeating. I noticed she never said he was a devoted husband. Halfway through the service, I saw the young woman again. She was seated in the second row, next to a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. She looked about 25, maybe younger. Long, dark hair, straight posture, eyes that didn't look lost or grieving. They looked steady, watching. When the pastor finished speaking, the man in the gray suit approached me. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said gently. "I'm Nathan Cole. I'm an attorney." My stomach tightened. I handled some private matters for Gerald. Private matters. The words felt like a door opening onto darkness. He glanced toward the young woman. "And this is Marissa Hale." The name meant nothing to me until she stepped forward and said quietly, "I'm his daughter." The room didn't spin. It didn't shatter. It just went very, very still. I remember hearing the faint tick of the church clock on the wall. Someone coughing in the back row. Donna's hand slipping off my arm. I stared at the girl. "No," I said automatically. "That's not possible." Her expression didn't change. "He had me before he married you," she replied. Calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. My mouth went dry. "When?" I whispered. 25 years ago, she said. 25 years. Which meant he had already been seeing someone else during the early years of our marriage, while we were trying for a baby, while I was blaming my own body for every miscarriage. A hot wave of nausea rose in my throat. Nathan cleared his throat. "There is also a matter regarding Gerald's will." That word hit me like a slap. Will. Inheritance. The quiet promises Gerald had made about taking care of me, about making sure I would never struggle. My hands began to tremble. "What about it?" I asked. Nathan hesitated, just long enough for dread to bloom. "You were not included." The words landed like a final shovel of dirt on a coffin. Not included. Excluded. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. Donna gasped dramatically behind me, but I barely heard her. All I could see was Marissa, still calm, still steady, still standing closer to my husband's casket than I was. And in that moment, as grief twisted into something sharper, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just a hidden truth. This was manipulation, planning, a betrayal so deep it had been quietly growing inside my marriage for decades. And I had been the only one who didn't know. But what I didn't understand yet was that losing the inheritance would turn out to be the least painful part, because 3 days later, I would discover something inside Gerald's office that would change everything. Something that would transform my grief into a very specific, very deliberate desire for revenge. 3 nights after the funeral, I let myself into Gerald's office for the first time since he died. The room still smelled like him. Pine-scented aftershave, old leather, sawdust clinging faintly to his jackets. For a moment, I just stood in the doorway, gripping the frame, fighting the urge to cry. Not because I missed him, but because I realized I had never truly known him. The office had always been his territory. His work sanctuary, he called it. Even after he moved most of the company operations to a rented building downtown, he still spent hours in this room with the door closed. I had respected that privacy. Now I wondered if privacy had simply been another word for secrecy. The desk was large, heavy oak, with deep drawers that stuck slightly when opened. I sat down in his chair. It felt wrong, like sitting in a stranger's seat. I opened the top drawer first. Pens, old receipts, a tape measure. Nothing unusual. The second drawer held folders labeled with company projects. Then I reached the bottom drawer, locked. A cold feeling slid down my spine. Gerald had never locked anything in our home before, not once in 32 years. I stared at the small brass lock for a long moment. Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, and returned with the spare key ring we kept for household odds and ends. On the third key, the lock clicked open. The sound felt louder than it should have. Inside the drawer was a black binder, and beneath it, a stack of photographs tied with a rubber band. My hands began to shake as I lifted them. The first photo showed Gerald standing beside a very pregnant woman. She looked familiar. It took me a few seconds to place her. Caroline Hale, our neighbor from 25 years ago. The same woman who used to borrow sugar. The same woman who had once cried on my shoulder after a messy breakup. The same woman who had moved away suddenly, without explanation. I flipped to the next photo. Gerald, holding a newborn baby, smiling in a way I had never seen. Open, radiant, proud. A father's smile. My vision blurred. All those years, I believed he was grieving our miscarriages with me. He had already been holding his child in his arms. The betrayal burned like acid in my chest. But when I opened the black binder, the burn turned into ice. Inside were financial records, property transfers, insurance policies, legal agreements, page after page detailing how Gerald had been quietly moving assets into a trust with one sole beneficiary, Marissa Hale. The mansion-style house he bought 5 years ago under a company shell, the investment accounts, even the construction company itself. Everything transferred, protected, planned, and there, clipped to the inside cover, was a typed letter addressed to his attorney. In it, Gerald wrote plainly that he did not trust me to handle his legacy responsibly, that he believed I would waste the inheritance, that he was intentionally excluding me from the will. The words sliced deeper than any insult I had ever heard. After decades of loyalty, of cleaning classrooms at night while he built his business, of standing beside him through every hardship, he saw me as disposable, replaceable, unworthy. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, while something inside me hardened into a shape I barely recognized. Grief shifted, pain sharpened, and slowly, quietly, it transformed into something else. Clarity. Because for the first time, I wasn't just seeing betrayal. I was seeing a pattern of manipulation that had stretched across decades. Gerald had lied. Caroline had lied. Marissa had stepped into my life already knowing the truth, and now they expected me to simply disappear, to accept being excluded, forgotten, erased. I closed the binder slowly. My hands were steady now, because in that moment, a new thought took root in my mind, not about what I had lost, but about what they didn't realize. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was just a quiet, aging custodian who would fade into the background. What they didn't know was that I had spent 32 years cleaning up other people's messes. And I was very, very good at noticing things others overlooked, including something buried deep inside those financial records, something that could destroy everything Gerald had built, something that, if used carefully, could turn karma into something far more precise. And as I locked the drawer again, I whispered into the silent room for the first time since his death. You should have known better than to underestimate me. The first time I saw the irregularity, it was just a single number that didn't match. One line in a column of perfectly organized financial records. A transfer amount that had been rounded in a way no accountant would ever allow. It was small enough that most people would ignore it. But I had spent 3 decades cleaning classrooms, And that work teaches you something strange. You learn to notice patterns. Which desks are always messy? Which trash cans fill faster? Which stains are new? And which have been quietly spreading for months? You learn that the smallest irregularities often point to the biggest problems. I sat at Gerald's desk under the dim yellow desk lamp, flipping through the binder again. Slower this time. That's when I saw it. Several payments labeled as equipment purchases made through Whitaker Residential Builders, except the vendor names didn't look like equipment suppliers. They looked like shell companies. I pulled my phone closer and began searching each name. My pulse quickened with every result. 2 of the companies had been dissolved years ago. One had no online presence at all. Another listed a mailing address that turned out to be a vacant lot. And then there was the largest one, a company called Ridgeway Development Holdings. According to the records, Gerald had transferred nearly $500,000 to them over the past 7 years. But when I searched the business registry, the name that appeared under the ownership line made my breath stop. Caroline Hale, not Marissa, her mother. The same neighbor who once cried at my kitchen table while I poured her coffee and told her she deserved better than whatever man had broken her heart. My hands went cold. This wasn't just an affair. It wasn't even just favoritism. This was a long-running financial manipulation. They hadn't simply hidden a child from me. They had been quietly siphoning money out of the company for years. The realization hit like a physical blow. Gerald hadn't just betrayed my marriage. He had betrayed the very business we built together. Because while he ran the construction crews, I handled the paperwork in the early years. I balanced invoices, paid taxes, tracked payroll, until he told me about 15 years ago that it was too stressful for me and hired an outside accountant. I had believed he was protecting me. Now I understood. He was removing me. A memory surfaced suddenly. 3 winters ago, during Christmas week, Gerald came home late and unusually tense. He snapped at me for asking about a missing tax document. He had never snapped like that before. At the time, I told myself it was stress. Now, looking at the dates in the binder, I saw the truth. That was the same month one of the largest transfers had been made. He hadn't been stressed about work. He had been afraid of getting caught. My chest tightened as anger rose, steady and controlled. But then something else caught my eye. A folded legal document, tucked between 2 financial pages. I opened it carefully. It was an insurance policy. Not life insurance, liability insurance. And listed under the covered party wasn't Gerald's company. It was Ridgeway Development Holdings, which meant something very specific. If that shell company collapsed, if it were investigated, the financial trail would lead directly back to Whitaker Residential Builders. Back to Gerald. Back to the estate now controlled by Marissa. The implications settled slowly, like snow covering the ground. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to confront anyone. I didn't even need to fight the will, because they had already created their own vulnerability. They had built their inheritance on a foundation of fraud. And fraud, once exposed, had a way of unraveling everything. I leaned back in Gerald's chair, feeling the weight of 32 years pressing against my ribs. For the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself to cry, not for him. Not for the marriage, but for the woman I had been, the trusting one, the loyal one, the one who believed love meant shared truth. The tears didn't last long, because beneath them, something else was forming. A plan, careful, patient, precise, the kind that doesn't explode, the kind that tightens slowly until the other side doesn't even realize they're trapped. I closed the binder and whispered into the quiet office. You didn't just betray me, Gerald. My voice sounded calm, almost unfamiliar. You handed me the key to everything. But what I didn't know yet was that someone else already suspected the truth. And in less than a week, that person would knock on my door with an offer that would change the entire game. The knock came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had just returned from my overnight shift at the high school, my back aching from scrubbing gum off hallway tiles. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. I wasn't ready to face anyone. Not Donna with her false sympathy. Not curious neighbors. Not anyone who might look at me with pity. But the knock came again. Firm, patient, not intrusive. Something about it made me open the door. A tall woman in a charcoal coat stood on my porch, holding a leather folder close to her chest. Her posture was straight, her expression calm but serious. "Mrs. Whitaker?" she asked. Yes, my name is Evelyn Pierce. I'm a forensic accountant. The word sent a sharp ripple through my stomach. Forensic accountant. Not just an accountant. Someone who investigated financial crimes. She watched my reaction carefully before continuing. I believe your late husband's company may have been involved in financial misconduct, she said gently. The air seemed to thin around us. How would you know that? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Because Whitaker Residential Builders has been flagged in a broader audit connected to Ridgeway Development Holdings. Hearing that name spoken aloud felt like confirmation of everything I'd discovered. She stepped slightly closer. And before you panic, she added, I want you to understand something very important. Her eyes met mine. You are not listed as a responsible party. Relief didn't come. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Because I already knew. I had seen the paperwork. Gerald had removed me from everything long ago. What happens now? I asked quietly. Evelyn hesitated. That depends on what evidence exists, she said, and who chooses to cooperate. There it was, the unspoken offer. I stepped aside. Come in. Inside, she sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Caroline Hale once cried about her imaginary heartbreak decades ago. The irony tasted bitter. Evelyn opened her folder, revealing several printed charts. These transactions, she explained, pointing to highlighted lines, indicate structured fund diversion over many years. I didn't act surprised. Instead, I walked to the hallway, retrieved the black binder from where I had hidden it in a storage box, and placed it gently on the table. Her eyes widened slightly. You already know, she said. I found everything, I replied. She flipped through the pages quickly, her professional composure slipping just enough to show shock. This is extremely thorough documentation, she murmured. Yes, I said softly. Gerald liked to keep records. Evelyn looked up at me. If you turn this over, she said carefully, it could trigger a full investigation. I held her gaze. And what would happen to the estate? She didn't hesitate. Assets linked to fraudulent transfers could be frozen. Frozen. The word echoed with quiet power, which meant Marissa wouldn't just inherit everything smoothly. She could lose it. All of it. Not through revenge. Through consequences. Through karma shaped by truth. I felt something shift inside me. Not rage. Not bitterness. Something steadier. Justice. Evelyn closed the binder slowly. This kind of case, she said, often becomes very public. Public, which meant secrets wouldn't stay buried. Which meant reputations could collapse, which meant people who had quietly erased me might suddenly have to face me again. I folded my hands together on the table. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to control. What do you need from me? I asked. Evelyn met my eyes. Only one thing. She paused. Are you ready for the truth to come out? I thought of Gerald's letter calling me irresponsible. I thought of Caroline's lies. I thought of Marissa standing beside that coffin with her calm, entitled smile. And I answered without hesitation. Yes. But what neither of us realized yet was that Marissa had already anticipated this possibility, and she was preparing her own move, one that would force our first confrontation sooner than either of us expected. I received the letter exactly 8 days after Evelyn Pierce left my kitchen table. It arrived in a thick cream envelope, the kind lawyers use when they want something to feel official and final. My name was printed in sharp black ink. Lorraine Whitaker, not Mrs. Whitaker, just my name, as if the marriage itself had already been erased. I stood at the mailbox longer than I should have, staring at it while the autumn wind pushed dry leaves across the driveway. The maple tree in our yard had started shedding, its branches thinning, skeletal against the gray sky. Something about that tree felt like a reflection of my life, stripped down to what was left after decades of believing in something that had never truly existed. I opened the envelope at the kitchen counter. Inside was a legal notice and a single line that made my stomach tighten. You are hereby instructed to vacate the property within 30 days. My fingers went numb. Vacate, not request. Not discussion. An order. Issued by the executor of Gerald Whitaker's estate, Marissa Hale. Below the formal language was a short, handwritten note in elegant script. I know this is difficult, but this house legally belongs to me now. I hope we can handle this respectfully. Respectfully. The word felt like a quiet insult. I sank into a chair, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. 32 years in that house. Every corner carried a memory. The kitchen where I hosted Thanksgiving dinners, setting out turkey and cranberry sauce, while Gerald carved with that serious focus he always had. The living room where we placed a small artificial Christmas tree each year, because he said real ones made too much mess. The bedroom where I once cried silently after each miscarriage, believing my body had failed him. Now all of it belonged to a young woman who had known about me her entire life, who had watched from the shadows while I lived in ignorance. For a moment, a wave of helplessness rose inside my chest, but it didn't stay, because I remembered something. I wasn't powerless anymore. The binder sat hidden in a locked storage box beneath my bed. The truth sat quietly, waiting. And that truth had weight. Enough weight to shift everything. Still, the letter hurt in a way I hadn't expected. Not because of the house, but because of what it revealed about Marissa. She hadn't reached out with empathy. She hadn't tried to speak to me like a human being. She had chosen a legal threat. Cold, efficient, final. Which meant something very clear. She saw me as an obstacle, not a person, not someone who had shared decades of her father's life, just an inconvenience to be removed. That realization settled into my chest like a stone. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Then I did something I hadn't done since the funeral. I called her. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was calm, controlled, the same tone she had used in the church. "Yes, it's Lorraine," I said. A brief pause. "I assumed you might call," she replied. No warmth, no hesitation. Just quiet certainty. "I received your letter," I said. "I thought it would be better to handle things formally," she answered. Better for whom? The question hovered unspoken between us. I took a slow breath. "You knew about me your entire life, didn't you?" I asked. She didn't deny it. "Yes." The honesty landed like a cold splash of water. "Did you ever—" My voice faltered before I forced it steady. "Did you ever think about what this would feel like for me?" There was a long silence. When she spoke again, her tone softened slightly. "My mother told me you had your chance," she said quietly. "She said my father stayed with you out of obligation, that you would have taken everything if he hadn't protected me." The words struck deeper than I expected. Not just betrayal, manipulation. Caroline had shaped her daughter's view of me for decades, turned me into the villain in a story I never knew existed. "That's not true," I whispered. Another silence. Then Marissa said something that made the air in my lungs freeze. "Regardless, the legal situation won't change. And if you try to contest the will, it won't go well for you." There was something beneath her calm voice. Not just confidence, a warning, a very specific one. Because she added quietly, almost casually, "You don't want anyone digging too deeply into the company finances." The world tilted slightly. She knew, or at least suspected. My heart began to pound. I kept my voice steady. Why would that matter? Another pause. When she spoke again, her tone was colder. "Because scandals destroy everyone involved," she said. Then she hung up. I stood in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. The conversation had changed everything. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was a battle over truth. And Marissa wasn't as calm or secure as she appeared. She was afraid of exactly the same thing I now held in my possession. Which meant one very important truth had become clear. She wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to silence me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain tapped against the bedroom window in slow, uneven rhythms, like fingers drumming on glass. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Marissa's words over and over. "You don't want anyone digging too deeply into the company finances." It wasn't just a warning. It was proof. She knew about the fraud, or at least part of it, which meant Gerald hadn't kept everything secret from her. He had trusted her, prepared her, trained her, perhaps. A strange realization settled in my chest. This wasn't simply a hidden daughter stepping into an inheritance. This was someone who had been groomed to take control long before his death. And that meant something else, too. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting her mother, Caroline Hale, the woman who had once borrowed sugar from my kitchen and cried on my shoulder about a man she never named. The memory made my stomach twist. How many times had she stood inside this house, smiling politely, while hiding the truth. How many conversations had been lies? I sat up abruptly, unable to stay still any longer. If Marissa already knew about the financial irregularities, then time was no longer on my side. She might try to cover tracks, move assets, destroy records. I walked to the closet, opened the storage box beneath the folded winter blankets, and lifted out the black binder. The weight of it felt different now. Not just evidence, leverage. I flipped through the pages again, more carefully than before. That's when I noticed something I had overlooked. At the very back of the binder was a sealed envelope I hadn't opened yet. It was smaller than the others, plain white, with my name written on it in Gerald's handwriting. My breath caught. He had left me something, not in the will, not in any official document, but hidden here, where he knew I would eventually look. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten letter. Lorraine, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found the records. I know you will feel betrayed. That is unavoidable, but you need to understand something. I did what I did because I believed you would never survive financially on your own. You are kind, but you are not strong in business matters. Marissa is. She has the instincts to protect what I built. This arrangement was never meant to hurt you. It was meant to preserve the legacy. There was no apology in the words, no remorse, just cold justification, as if my entire life had been a calculation he had already solved. But the last line stopped my breath completely. There is something else you should know. If the financial transfers are ever exposed, it will not just destroy Marissa's inheritance. It will also reveal the truth about how Whitaker residential builders actually stayed afloat during the recession. A truth that could implicate more people than you realize. I folded the letter slowly, my mind racing. More people, which meant this wasn't just a private betrayal. This was something bigger. A network, a secret buried deep inside the company's history. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crept into my chest. Because revenge was one thing, but exposing something that large could create consequences far beyond Marissa, far beyond Caroline. It could pull powerful people into the light, people who would not want their secrets revealed. I sat there in the dim bedroom, the rain still tapping the window, feeling the weight of a decision pressing against my ribs. I could stay quiet, walk away, start over somewhere small and safe, or I could step forward, tell the truth, and risk igniting something far more dangerous than I had imagined. As I slid Gerald's letter back into the envelope, one thought settled into place with terrifying clarity. This was no longer just a story about betrayal. It was about power. And the deeper I dug, the more I would discover just how many people had benefited from keeping me in the dark. The first time I felt truly afraid was not when I read Gerald's letter. It was the following afternoon when I noticed a black sedan parked across the street from my house. It had tinted windows. The engine wasn't running, but it stayed there for hours. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A neighbor's visitor, a delivery driver taking a break, something ordinary. But when I stepped outside to take the trash to the curb, I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. The car didn't move. No one stepped out. Yet the stillness of it felt deliberate, like a presence waiting quietly. A cold unease settled into my stomach because I hadn't told anyone about the binder except Evelyn Pierce, and she had promised confidentiality, which left only one possibility: Marissa, or someone connected to her. I walked back inside, slowly, forcing myself not to look over my shoulder. The house felt different now, not a home, a place under observation. I locked the door and pulled the curtains shut, my hands steady even as my pulse thudded in my ears. Fear was there, but it wasn't the kind that made me freeze. It was the kind that sharpened everything. That forced clarity, because Gerald's last words echoed in my mind. More people than you realize. That meant whoever had benefited from those financial transfers might now see me as a threat. Not just Marissa. Not just Caroline. Something bigger. I picked up the phone and called Evelyn. She answered immediately. "I think someone is watching my house," I said. There was a brief pause before she responded, her voice calm but serious. "That's possible," she said. My breath caught. You mean this has happened before? In cases involving long-term financial diversion, she replied carefully. It's not unusual for interested parties to monitor potential whistleblowers. Whistleblower. The word sounded heavy. Real. Should I be worried? I asked. Another pause. Not in the way you're thinking, she said gently. No one wants to harm you physically, but they may try to intimidate you, pressure you into staying silent. I walked to the window and peeked through the curtain. The sedan was still there. They already are, I whispered. Evelyn's voice softened. Lorraine, you need to decide something very important right now. I closed my eyes. What? Do you want to pursue justice fully, she said, or do you want to negotiate a private settlement? The question hung in the air, like a fork in the road. One path, quiet, safe, likely involving money, offered in exchange for silence. The other path, public, messy, dangerous, but honest. I thought of Gerald's letter, of being called weak, irresponsible, excludable. I thought of Caroline's lies, of Marissa's cold, legal notice. And I felt something rise inside me that was stronger than fear. I want the truth, I said. No hesitation. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then we move forward, she said. But you need to prepare yourself. This will escalate. Escalate. The word echoed in my chest long after we hung up. That evening, as darkness settled over the neighborhood, the black sedan finally drove away. But the message remained clear. They knew I had something. They didn't know exactly what, yet. But they were already watching. And for the first time, I understood something with perfect clarity. This wasn't just a personal revenge story anymore. This was a confrontation with a system that had quietly protected itself for years, and I had just stepped directly into its path. What I didn't know was that the next move wouldn't come from a stranger in a car. It would come from someone far closer, someone who had once sat at my kitchen table and called me friend. Caroline Hale knocked on my door 2 days later. She didn't look like the woman I remembered from 25 years ago. Her hair, once chestnut brown, was now a carefully styled silver. Her posture was rigid, elegant, almost rehearsed. She wore a tailored navy coat and held a leather purse with both hands, as if it were a shield. But her eyes were the same, sharp, calculated. The moment I opened the door, the air between us filled with decades of unspoken truth. Lorraine, she said quietly. Hearing my name in her voice again sent a strange chill through me. Not warmth, not nostalgia, just a hollow echo of what had once been trust. You shouldn't be here, I replied. Her lips pressed together briefly. Please, she said. We need to talk. For a moment, I considered shutting the door. But curiosity held me still, because I wanted to see her, to hear what she would say now that the truth was no longer buried. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, her gaze drifting around the living room, the same room where she had once laughed over coffee with me, the same couch where she had cried, claiming heartbreak. I watched her closely. She noticed everything. The packed boxes near the hallway, the quiet emptiness already settling into the space. I didn't want it to happen this way, she said softly. The words made something inside me tighten. You mean you didn't want me to find out? I replied. She flinched slightly, but she didn't deny it. No, she admitted. I didn't. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke again. Gerald loved you, she said. The statement hit like an insult. No, I said quietly. He loved control. Her jaw tightened. You don't understand, she insisted. I understand perfectly, I replied. I gestured toward the house. You lived across the street. You watched me try to have children. You watched me grieve miscarriages. And all that time, you knew he had already built another family with you. Her eyes filled with something that almost looked like regret. Things weren't that simple, she whispered. They were exactly that simple, I said. You chose deception. Her shoulders sagged slightly. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I'm not here to argue, she said. She placed it on the coffee table between us. Inside, I could see the edges of legal documents. What is this? I asked. A settlement offer, she replied quietly. The word hung heavy in the air. Settlement. As Evelyn had predicted. If you agree not to cooperate with any investigations, Caroline continued, Marissa is prepared to provide you with a substantial financial arrangement. Substantial. The implication was clear. Money in exchange for silence, for disappearing quietly. for allowing them to keep everything intact. I stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then I looked back at her. "Do you think money is what I lost?" I asked softly. Her expression faltered, because she knew the answer. What I lost wasn't financial. It was decades of truth, trust, identity. "I'm trying to protect my daughter," she said, her voice breaking slightly. The words cut in a different way, because for the first time, I saw something real in her. Fear. Not arrogance, not manipulation. Just fear. And in that moment, a final piece of understanding settled into place. She wasn't just defending wealth. She was defending the narrative she had built for 25 years. The story that justified everything she had done. But protecting a lie for that long comes with a cost. And now that cost was arriving. I slid the envelope back toward her. "No," I said calmly. Her eyes widened. "You don't even know the amount," she whispered. "I don't need to," I replied. The room fell silent, because she understood. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was a reckoning. She stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly for the first time. "Then you're going to destroy her," she said. I met her gaze steadily. "No," I answered. "I'm going to tell the truth." And as she turned to leave, her shoulders rigid with a mixture of anger and dread, I realized something with absolute certainty. The next time I saw Marissa Hale, it would not be in a private conversation. It would be in a courtroom. And that confrontation would expose far more than any of them were prepared for. The official notice arrived on a gray morning thick with fog. Not from Marissa. Not from her attorney. From the state. A formal letter stamped with the seal of the Iowa Financial Crimes Division. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it. My pulse steady but heavy, like the slow tolling of a bell. This was the point of no return. Once a government investigation began, there would be no quiet endings, no private settlements, no buried truths, only exposure. I slid the paper out carefully. "You are hereby requested to provide testimony and documentation related to an ongoing financial fraud investigation involving Whitaker Residential Builders and Ridgeway Development Holdings." Requested, not forced, yet. But the meaning was clear. They were moving forward, and I had become a central witness. I set the letter down on the kitchen table, staring at it, while a strange mix of emotions moved through me. Relief, fear, grief, and something deeper, vindication. Because for decades, I had lived inside a story written by someone else. A story where I was the loyal wife, the quiet supporter, the woman who stayed in the background while others made decisions. Now, for the first time, I was stepping into a role I had never imagined. The one who would reveal the truth. The phone rang before I could gather my thoughts. "Evelyn Pierce. They've initiated formal proceedings," she said without preamble. "I received the letter," I replied. Her voice softened slightly. "This will move quickly now," she said. "Once subpoenas are issued, financial records, emails, and internal company communications will all be examined." I closed my eyes briefly, which meant something very important. Secrets Gerald had hidden even from me would soon surface. "What about Marissa?" I asked quietly. A pause. "She has retained high-level legal counsel," Evelyn said. "She's preparing to defend the estate aggressively." Aggressively. The word didn't surprise me. Marissa had never shown hesitation, never shown doubt. But then Evelyn added something that tightened my chest. "She's also requested a private meeting with you." I sat up straighter. "A meeting?" "Yes," Evelyn confirmed, through her attorney. "She says she wants to resolve matters before the investigation escalates further." Resolve. Another word for control, for containment. I looked around the quiet kitchen, the familiar space already half-packed into boxes. For a moment, I saw flashes of the past. Thanksgiving dinners with warm laughter. Christmas mornings with soft music playing while snow fell outside. All of it layered over a foundation of deception I had never seen. "Where?" I asked. "At her attorney's office," Evelyn replied. "Tomorrow morning." I hesitated, only a moment. "Tell them I'll be there." After the call ended, I sat in silence, feeling the weight of what was coming. This would not be a friendly conversation. It would be a confrontation. The first direct clash between the woman who had lived in the light of ignorance and the woman who had grown up in the shadow of secrets. The next morning, the law office felt cold and sterile. all glass walls and polished floors. Marissa sat across the conference table when I entered. She wore a cream-colored suit, her posture perfectly composed. But something in her eyes had changed. The calm certainty was gone. In its place was tension. And something else. Desperation. Her attorney introduced himself briefly, then excused us to speak privately. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Two women, bound by the same man's lies. "You've gone further than I expected," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but quieter than before. "I didn't go anywhere," I replied. "The truth did." She exhaled slowly. "You don't understand what you're triggering," she said. I held her gaze. "Then explain." Her hands tightened slightly on the table. "My father wasn't the only one involved," she said. "There were investors, partners, people who relied on those financial arrangements." The words echoed Gerald's warning. "More people than you realize. If this becomes public," she continued, "it won't just affect me or my mother. It could collapse multiple businesses, destroy livelihoods." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her expression. Not just for herself, for something larger. I considered her words carefully. Then I asked quietly, "Did you ever think about the livelihood of the woman your father betrayed for 32 years? The question hung in the air like a blade. Her eyes dropped briefly. For the first time, she had no answer. And in that silence, I realized something that shifted everything inside me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. And accountability never comes without consequences. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. It was smaller than I expected. Not grand or dramatic like the ones in television shows. Just rows of benches, a raised platform for the judge, and an atmosphere heavy with quiet tension. I sat at the witness table, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Across the room, Marissa sat beside her attorney. She looked pale, not weak, but strained, like someone carrying weight she could no longer control. Caroline sat behind her, rigid, her face tight with fear and anger. Seeing her there stirred something deep in my chest. Not rage, not hatred. Just a profound sense of distance, like looking at someone from a life that no longer belonged to me. The proceedings began with formal statements about financial irregularities, shell companies, and asset transfers. Legal language, precise, clinical, but beneath every term was a simple truth: deception. When it was my turn to speak, the room seemed to grow very still. I stood, my legs steady despite the pounding of my heart. The prosecutor asked straightforward questions. How long had I been married to Gerald Whitaker? Did I have knowledge of Ridgeway Development Holdings during his lifetime? How did I discover the financial records? I answered calmly, clearly, without embellishment, just the truth. And as I spoke, something unexpected happened. The pain that had once lived inside those memories no longer controlled me, because telling the truth transformed them. It gave them shape, meaning, power. Then the prosecutor asked the final question. "Mrs. Whitaker, why did you choose to come forward?" The courtroom fell silent. Even Marissa looked up. I took a slow breath and answered from the deepest place inside me. "Because betrayal thrives in silence," I said quietly. "And for 32 years, I lived inside someone else's silence." I paused. But silence ends when truth is spoken. The words settled into the room like falling snow. No drama, no anger, just clarity. When I stepped down from the stand, I felt something shift inside me, a weight lifting. Not because the battle was over. It wasn't. But because for the first time, I had reclaimed my voice. As I walked past Marissa, she didn't look at me, but I saw her hands trembling slightly, because she understood now. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a private family dispute. This was karma unfolding in the open. And once karma begins, it cannot be stopped. What none of us knew yet was that the final twist of Gerald Whitaker's legacy had not been revealed. And it would surface in the most unexpected way of all. I thought the worst of it had already come to light. I was wrong. 3 weeks after my testimony, Evelyn Pierce called me, with a tone I had never heard from her before. Not calm, not measured, urgent. "They found something," she said. I was sitting in a small rented apartment on the edge of Cedar Falls by then. I had left the house quietly before the 30-day notice expired. I didn't fight it. I didn't beg. I packed my life into boxes and walked away with my head high. The house had never truly belonged to me, but my dignity did. "What did they find?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "A secondary ledger," Evelyn said, "hidden within archived construction contracts. It predates the transfers to Ridgeway." My stomach tightened. How far back? Nearly 20 years. That meant before Marissa was legally brought into the company structure. Before the recession. Before most of the shell companies were even created. "Lorraine," she continued carefully, "it appears Whitaker Residential Builders received emergency funding during the recession from a private investor." I frowned. "That's not illegal." "No," she agreed. "But the source of the funds is." Silence stretched between us. "Who?" I whispered. Her next words felt like the ground shifting beneath my feet. "Caroline Hale." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Caroline. Not just a beneficiary. Not just a mistress. An investor. "She financed the company?" I asked slowly. "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. "Using funds from a wrongful death settlement she received years ago. The money was quietly injected into the business to keep it afloat during the housing market crash." Images flickered in my mind. Caroline, crying at my kitchen table decades ago, claiming her ex-partner had left her with nothing. The sudden improvements in Gerald's mood during the recession. The way he insisted we were weathering the storm better than most. He hadn't been weathering it. He had been rescued by her. A wave of cold understanding washed over me. "This wasn't just an affair," I said softly. "No," Evelyn replied. "It was a partnership." Everything shifted in that moment. Gerald hadn't stayed with me out of obligation. He had stayed because my presence provided stability, respectability, while his real alliance existed across the street. Caroline hadn't just hidden a child. She had funded the empire. And Marissa hadn't simply inherited wealth. She had inherited her mother's investment. The financial fraud wasn't just about siphoning money. It was about disguising the origin of that early capital. If the state uncovered that Caroline's settlement funds had been misrepresented to secure additional bank loans during the recession, the consequences would be devastating. Fraud, perjury, conspiracy. The entire foundation of the company could collapse. And suddenly, something else clicked into place. Marissa's fear in the conference room, Caroline's desperate settlement offer. They weren't just protecting inheritance. They were protecting exposure of something much older, much deeper. That evening, I sat alone in my small apartment, staring out at the dim parking lot lights. For the first time, I felt a strange flicker of empathy. Caroline had once been a young woman, raising a child alone. She had poured her settlement money into a man who promised partnership. But partnership built on secrecy is never equal. Gerald had used both of us in different ways. And now, decades later, the truth was dismantling everything he built. The next court hearing would not be about minor financial transfers. It would be about the origin of the company itself. And when that truth surfaced publicly, there would be no controlled narrative left. No clean inheritance. No quiet victory. Only consequence. The final hearing lasted less than 2 hours. By then, the evidence was overwhelming. The hidden ledger, the misrepresented funding, the shell companies masking improper transfers. Caroline testified. Her voice trembled as she admitted investing her settlement funds into Whitaker Residential Builders without disclosing the arrangement to banks or regulators. Marissa sat rigid beside her attorney, eyes fixed forward, her composure finally fractured. When the judge delivered his ruling, the courtroom was silent enough to hear every breath. The estate assets tied to fraudulent activity would be frozen, pending full investigation, which meant the mansion-style property purchased under the company name, frozen. The investment accounts, frozen. The controlling shares of the business, under review. Marissa did not inherit a thriving empire. She inherited legal uncertainty. Caroline did not protect her daughter's future. She exposed it to scrutiny. As for me, I received nothing from the estate. Not a dollar. Not a property. Not even an apology. But as I stepped outside the courthouse into the sharp winter air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Because revenge, I realized, isn't always about gaining something. Sometimes it's about refusing to carry someone else's lie any longer. Marissa approached me outside. No attorneys, no witnesses, just the two of us, beneath a gray sky. "You could have taken the settlement," she said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. Why didn't you? I studied her face. She looked younger now. Not in years, but in understanding. Because money wouldn't have fixed what was broken, I replied. She swallowed. My father said you were too emotional to handle business. I felt a faint, almost ironic smile touch my lips. And yet, I said softly, I'm the one still standing. She looked at me then, really looked at me. For the first time, there was no hostility, no manipulation, only recognition. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but recognition. Two women who had finally seen the same truth. Gerald Whitaker's legacy was not strength, it was control. And control built on deception eventually collapses. As I walked away from the courthouse, snow began to fall lightly around me. Soft, quiet, clean. I didn't know what the future would look like. I was nearly 60, working nights as a custodian, living in a modest apartment. But I was free. Free from silence, free from manipulation, free from being excluded from my own story. And if there's one thing I want you to understand from my journey, it's this. Betrayal can break you. Family drama can shake your identity. Inheritance battles can make you feel erased. But karma doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives through truth, through courage, through refusing to stay quiet. If you've ever been excluded, manipulated, or made to feel small inside your own life, I hope my story reminds you of something important. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply standing in the light and letting the truth do the work. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you've ever faced betrayal and found your own way back to strength. And if you believe in karma-based justice and truth over silence, and women reclaiming their power after 55, then don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are more stories to tell. And sometimes, telling them is where healing truly begins.